The sea was calm the morning the Buyo Maru left port for the last time. A faint mist clung to the water, rolling low across the Pacific like a thin ghost. Among the thousands aboard, Japanese soldiers, Indian POWs, and Korean laborers. There were whispers about where they were headed next, but no certainty. None of them imagined that somewhere out there, somewhere beneath the surface of the same ocean that carried them forward, a hunter already waited. The USS Wahoo. Its captain, Lieutenant Commander Dooley Mush Morton, had one of the most fearsome reputations in the submarine fleet. To him, a transport ship was not just a vessel. It was a vein feeding the Japanese Empire. Cut the vein, and the body weakens. He believed in decisive blows, not glancing ones. And on February 26, 1943, those two paths, the doomed transport ship and the driven hunter, were on a collision course that would stain the calm waters with confusion, violence, and tragedy. But such tragedies never begin in a single moment. They are born slowly, indivisibly, in decisions made months or years earlier, in doctrines, in personalities, in pressure that grinds down judgment until only instinct remains. To understand why the men aboard the Buyo Maru were fired upon after their ship sank, to understand why Allied POWs died at the hands of their own side, we must go back to the beginning.
Episode is brought to you by the Fabric Cobbler. The Fabric Cobbler was created by Scarlett to carry fabric that no one else carries. The store is a safe place for all those who come. At the Fabric Cobbler, customers are family. The Fabric Cobbler is located at 324 East Roll Street, Forsyth, Illinois, or online at www.thefabriccobbler.com.
By the beginning of 1943, the Pacific War was no longer the controlled, predictable advance Japan had enjoyed in the opening months. The empire was stretched, wide, fragile, vulnerable. America's carriers were recovering. American codebreakers were improving. American submarines, once inconsistent, were beginning to strike with growing precision. Japan's logistics were its Achilles heel. Its conquests spanned thousands of miles, from the Aleutians to the Indian Ocean, and the empire depended on that steady flow of supplies, reinforcements, and food. If the transports died, so would the war effort. American admirals knew this. More importantly, submarine commanders knew it too. From Pearl Harbor to Brisbane, the unspoken philosophy spreading through the submarine bases was simple. Stop the ships, starve the empire. But beneath that strategic doctrine was something less official, though equally real. A competition between submarine captains for kills. Enter Mush Morton. Dooley Walker Morton was charismatic, bold, and brash. The sort of officer sailors loved and senior commanders watched closely. He believed that victory could not be won at half speed. His creed was brunt. Shoot first, shoot fast, shoot until the enemy cannot return. His patrol reports were peppered with aggressive language. His crew adored him. He pushed his submarine, the USS Wahoo, harder than most. Wahoo's previous captain, Marvin Kennedy, had been more cautious. Perhaps too cautious for a war that demanded risk. Morton replaced him with a fire already burning through his mind. Morton's executive officer, Richard O'Kane, later famous for commanding USS Tang, wrote admiring that Morton taught him how to fight. Morton wasn't reckless, he was purposeful, but he also believed in finishing engagements. That belief would matter on February 26th. Weapons and doctrine shaped behavior. US submarines carried 44 torpedoes when everything worked, which it often didn't, deck guns, 50 caliber machine guns, and 20mm Oerlikon cannons. The official laws of war, the Hague Convention, stated clearly, firing upon survivors of a sinking ship was prohibited. But the war in the Pacific was not clean. In 1942 and 1943, Japanese ships, often carrying troops, would fire on submarines from the water. Some survivors were armed. Some Japanese transports had disguised gun crews. Submarines had been ambushed while attempting rescue, so the U.S. Navy commanders often gave wide discretion to submarine captains. If a captain believed survivors posed a threat, he was justified, at least internally, in taking action. Official humanitarian law stood firm. Unofficial, the line blurred. Morton's own belief, shaped by experience and the ferocity of the Pacific, was if they can shoot, they are still combatants. That mindset, more than anything, shaped what happened next. The Buyo Maru was a medium-sized transport, part of a convoy shuttling troops and supplies between Japanese-held territories. She was not glamorous. She was not heavily armed. She was one of countless steel workhorses feeding the imperial machine. She carried Japanese soldiers, mostly reinforcements for New Guinea, Indian POWs being moved to labor camps, Korean laborers, and citizens connected to the Japanese military bureaucracy. Life aboard was cramped, loud, and tense. The Indian POWs were held in lower compartments, packed shoulder to shoulder. Many had been captured during the British collapse at Singapore. Among them were soldiers of the 2nd Battalion, 16th Punjab Regiment, and men from the Rajaputana Rifles. Those exact rosters remained debated. For them, the war had taken a brutal turn already. Loss of homeland, hope of rescue distant, and Japanese captivity unpredictable and often deadly. Now, they were being moved again, to a place none of them had been told about. The Buyo Maru traveled as part of a small convoy, escorted by 1 or 2 patrol boats, armed merchant vessels, and occasionally a destroyer. Convoy commanders feared submarines constantly. They had reason to. American submarines had turned parts of the Pacific into underwater killing zones. Destroyers zigzagged, lookouts scanned obsessively. Convoys tried to hug coastlines or travel at night. But in early 1943, the U.S. Navy submarine arm had become bold enough that even escorts were no guarantee of protection. The Japanese soldiers aboard the Buyo Maru were exhausted but hardened. Food was rationed, water was hot by midday, sleeping was difficult. The ship heaved constantly. Officers kept to their berths and tried to maintain discipline over both soldiers and prisoners. Tensions between groups was constant. Japanese soldiers guarded the Indian POWs with suspicion. The POWs were mistrustful, fearful, sometimes resigned. Korean laborers tried to avoid drawing attention from either group. Everything was fragile. Everything depended on reaching the next port safely. None of them knew Wahoo was already hunting them. The Wahoo was far from home, patrolling near the Japanese lines of communication around New Guinea. Morton had already sunk ships earlier in the patrol, but he wanted more. He believed his submarine could brutally disrupt Japan's military movements. On the morning of February 26, Wahoo was traveling submerged, battery-powered, with the crew listening to the ocean through hydrophones. Then the sound came. Propellers. Multiple. Slow, but steady. A convoy. Morton ordered the submarine deeper and plotted intercepting tracks. He studied enemy speeds, angles, spacing. He timed their movements with patience of a predator. Everything lined up. Few commanders in the Pacific felt as personally responsible for victory as Morton did. Sailors respected him because he understood them. He joked with them. He cursed freely. He spoke bluntly. He was not an abstract tactician. He was a hunter. He had once said to a crewman, "I'm here to sink ships. You're here to help me do it. That's the deal." But he also carried the burden of loss, of friends killed earlier in the war, of ships sunk by Japanese attacks, of the fear that if he hesitated, he would be the one destroyed. This mix of aggression duty, paranoia, and certainty traveled with him into every engagement, and it would dominate his decision-making on this day. At approximately 1530 hours, Wahoo rose to periscope depth. Morton spotted the Buyo Maru, a fat target, soldiers visible on deck, convoy escorts lagging just far enough behind. He ordered torpedoes loaded. The crew moved as choreographed. Torpedo men in the forward room slammed steel into position. Navigation officers calculated angles. The periscope rised like a silver needle above the waves. Morton steadied himself and whispered numbers. O'Kane recorded them. Then, the order. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3. 3 torpedoes left the tubes, each with a trail of bubbles racing towards the ship. The explosions, when they hit, shook the ocean. The Buyo Maru shuddered violently. Men screamed. Debris flew. The ship began to sink by the bow. Within minutes, the ocean was filled with hundreds of men, lifeboats, rafts, and floating wreckage. Morton watched them through the periscope. He saw movement. He saw flashes. Perhaps gunfire, perhaps sunlight. He believed the survivors were preparing to fire. This belief, real or imagined, set the stage for what came next. Accounts diverged sharply here. Some U.S. crew members later claimed Japanese soldiers fired rifles at the submarine. Bullets pinged off the Wahoo's hull. The survivors appeared to be organizing themselves. Japanese and Indian survivors reported no organized gunfire, chaotic panic, soldiers trying to stay alive, not fight. The truth, like the sea, was murky, but in Morton's mind, and in his war-conditioned instinct, any possibility of hostile fire was enough. Wahoo surfaced. The crew opened the hatch and spilled onto the deck. The machine guns were prepped. The 20mm cannon swung towards the rafts. Morton gave the command, "Commence firing." What followed lasted minutes that felt like hours. Gunfire rattled across the water. Rafts splintered. Debris flew in the air. Men screamed. Some tried to swim away. Some tried to return fire. Some accounts say a handful did. Others deny it. Indian POWs, unarmed and trapped among the Japanese soldiers, were caught in the fire. Morton believed he was eliminating a future threat, men who would otherwise return to the battlefield. But in reality, he was killing soldiers, prisoners, laborers, and men who had surrendered to the sea. The water turned red. Deep inside the Buyo Maru, beneath steel plates and wooden decking, lay the men who would pay the highest price for a battle they were never a part of. Indian prisoners of war, captured during Japan's lightning advance through Southeast Asia. They had fought under British command in Singapore, Malaya, Burma. Many had been forced to surrender when their officers ordered a hopeless stand. Now, they were scattered across the Pacific as slave labor, loading ships, building airstrips, cutting jungle. When Buyo Maru sailed, the POWs were packed shoulder to shoulder in dark, airless holds. The smell was thick with sweat, salt, mildew, and fear. A handful of guards watched them, rifles slung, bayonets fixed. The prisoners whispered, "Where are they taking us?" The answers were guesses. Rubal, New Guinea, a work camp, they need labor. No one guessed the ocean would become their grave. Life in the hold ran on a rhythm. Morning rice ladled into metal bowls. The scrapes of chains as guards paced overhead. Brief trips up to the deck for air and latrine duty. The long return into darkness. Some prayed, some hid their memories. Nanik Ahmed, a veteran of the Rajapan Rifles, repeated the same quiet sentence every morning. "Every day we live is victory." Others shook their heads, not believing, not wanting to. Food was thin, water was rationed. People grew weaker by the week. Yet one thing kept them going. The war was still happening. They had been soldiers once. Their size still might rescue them. They didn't know that the men coming for them wore the same uniforms. On the steel deck above, Japanese infantrymen smoked cigarettes and leaned on the rail, staring at the water. They were lean, tired, trained to endure anything. Most were boys from farms, small towns, fishing villages. They missed home. They dreamed of going back. Many had fought in New Guinea already. They told stories. Battles in the jungle, malaria, starvation, ambushes. They knew most men who went to the island never returned. Yet they laughed, played cards, sang songs quietly at night. They believed they were the shield of Japan. None imagined the ocean would betray them. Every evening at sunset, one rumor spread like a cold wind. American subs are out there. Some men claimed to have seen periscopes before. Others swore it was nonsense, superstition, but convoy commanders took it seriously. Lookouts swept the horizon. Escorts wove back and forth in zigzag patterns. Still, the ocean felt too large, too empty. The Japanese transports were specks on gray water. How could a submarine find them? That question comforted no one. Far below the waves, unseen, the USS Wahoo watched. Morton and his officers took notes. The sonar men listened. The crew rested, quietly excited, quietly waiting. Every submarine sailor lived with two competing fears: dying trapped underwater, or returning to base with no kills. A wasted patrol was a shame. A sunken submarine was silent. Between those two poles, men like Morton walked tightrope. He watched Buyo Maru through glass and the water and the distance. He saw armed soldiers on deck. He did not see the Indians. The sea hid them. When torpedoes struck, everything became noise. A blast like thunder, steel twisting, wood splintering, men thrown from their feet. Below deck, the POWs were plunged into chaos. Darkness, screams, buckets of seawater crashing through the air. Some guards abandoned their post. Others tried to hold order, shouting commands that no one ever heard. The ship tilted. Stairs became walls. Ahmed, the veteran, grabbed two young men. Up, up, go to the light. They stumbled towards the hatch, breath burning in their lungs. Smoke, oil, panic. On deck, Japanese soldiers swarmed towards the lifeboats. Officers yelled in clipped, desperate voices. Some men leapt into the sea. Others clung to rafts. The ocean accepted everyone. Friend, enemy, prisoner. Hundreds were now floating. Some in boats, some on planks. Some kicked desperately towards anything that might float. Men yelled in Japanese, Hindi, Bengali, Punjabi, Korean. Voices blurred into one sound: survival. One POW later remembered, "We thought the Americans would save us. We thought we were free." He saw the submarine rise. He waved. When the Wahoo broke the surface, she rose like a dark shape out of a legend. Men on the water stared. Some believed rescue had come. Others didn't know what to think. Morton climbed to the bridge. He scanned the horizon. He saw figures. He saw boats. He thought he saw muzzle flashes. He made a decision. The guns were manned. In the water, Ahmed lifted his arms again, calling out, "Help." He didn't know anyone was taking aim. He didn't know that the ocean could deliver death twice. The first time, by torpedo. The second time, by gunfire. Dawn broke, cold and chalk gray, over the Bay of Bengal. The oil slicks shimmered like bruises on the water. Wide, ugly stains spreading from where the Buyo Maru had been. In the distance, small shapes clung to wreckage. Men, hundreds of them, drifting, shivering, coughing salt and smoke from their lungs. They were Indian POWs, Japanese soldiers, and Korean laborers, all thrown together in the chaos of the sinking. And from the horizon came the sound. Not the crash of the sea, not the wind, a low mechanical rumble. The diesel engines of the USS Wahoo. Lieutenant Commander Dudley Mush Morton raised the periscope. The lens cut through the sea. What he saw was not survivors, not men clinging to rafts. He saw lifeboats, and lifeboats were, in the logic of a submarine war, potential threats. A lifeboat could carry armed soldiers, machine guns, a messenger who could reach friendly shores and reveal the submarine's presence. In every submarine officer's mind were two rules. 1. Do not leave witnesses. Number 2. Do not risk your boat. War at sea was brutal and stripped of ceremony. Morton did not hesitate. He ordered the deck guns to be manned. At first, the survivors didn't understand. They waved. Some cheered, believing rescue had come. They were cold, exhausted, oil-soaked. Why would anyone fire on them now? The first shell hit a raft. Wood shattered into flying splinters. Men were thrown into the sea. The sound rolled over the water, a concussion that struck the chest as much as the ear. Screams carried on the wind. Indian POWs scrambled, trying to paddle away with bare hands. Morton's voice was recorded later in a patrol log. Commence firing on boats. Survivors. The entry is short, emotionless, functional. A statement of procedure. On the submarine, the crew believed that they were firing on Japanese soldiers, because the lifeboats were flying Japanese flags. The uniforms, seen through the periscope, appeared dark, like Japanese fatigues. The men shouted in languages the Americans did not understand. There was no way, from the optic blur of a periscope, to distinguish Indian POWs from Japanese infantry. This was the mistake at the center of the controversy. Morton later said to his officers, "We could not take the chance." And, in the logic of submarine warfare, that statement made sense, but it was also tragically wrong. Crewmen on the Wahoo loaded the 3-inch deck gun again and again. Shells thumped in the water and erupted into white geysers. Every man worked with a kind of mechanical rhythm. Load, aim, fire, reload. They did not see individuals. They saw targets. One crew member later told investigators, "I saw figures jumping into the water. I did not see if they were soldiers. I just knew we had orders." Some on the submarine felt uneasy. Others were exhilarated, adrenaline humming through their veins. They had sunk a ship. Now they were finishing the job. Many in the water tried to hide behind overturned lifeboats. Bullets tore through the wood. Those who could swim dove deep, lungs burning, surfacing only when the firing paused. One Indian soldier remembered later in a statement, "We waved our arms. We called out. They kept firing." He floated beside a broken plank, watching his friends slip underneath the surface, mouths open, eyes blank. The sea swallowed him, he said. Out on the deck of the Wahoo, the firing continued for nearly 2 hours. When ammunition ran low, Morton ordered the final shots. Then, the submarine turned and slipped away, leaving behind wreckage and bodies floating in the oil-smudged sea. Morton did not write about remorse in his log. He wrote about results. He noted enemy casualties, damage inflicted, and tonnage sunk. This was how submarine commanders were judged. Not by mercy, not by restraint, by numbers. In the US Navy's eyes, Morton was becoming a star. Aggressive, unflinching, effective. His patrol reports were read by Admiral Lockwood in Pearl Harbor, who believed in hitting Japan with everything possible. The Pacific War did not reward hesitation. Morton once told a junior officer, "If you're going to fight, then fight." Hours later, small fishing vessels from the Burmese coast approached the wreckage. They found limbs tangled in debris, oil-soaked survivors clinging to life rings, men delirious from thirst and fear. The fishermen pulled them aboard, one at a time, some murmuring thanks. Others stared in shock, unable to speak. A survivor later recalled, "I could still hear the guns, even when they are gone." Japan claimed over 1,000 were killed. American records suggest hundreds. Post-war research estimated 195 Indian POWs, 87 Japanese soldiers, other Korean and Asian laborers. But even decades later, historians could not produce a single definitive number. The sea had taken too many. For a long time, the incident was little more than a patrol log entry, barely mentioned, barely noticed. But after the war, survivors' accounts emerged. Not soldiers, not armed, not a threat, civilians and POWs. Suddenly, the patrol log read differently. The question shifted from military necessity to moral responsibility. A naval historian would later say, Morton fired on lifeboats, and that has never been easy to explain. The Buyo Maru Incident was no longer a tactical event. It had become a moral debate. The Buyo Maru Incident did not begin as scandal. For years, it was just another page in a vast, chaotic ledger of the Pacific War. A small entry in a patrol report, a handful of witness statements, a footnote in history. It was not until decades later that the event was ever questioned, re-examined, and argued over. By then, most of the people involved were gone, but memory has a way of resurfacing. After the war, Allied intelligence collected hundreds of testimonies from Indian soldiers who had been captured by the Japanese. Mixed in with reports of hunger, disease, and forced labor were memories of a day at sea. A ship torpedoed, men in lifeboats, gunfire from a submarine. British officers heard the accounts, but they faced a dilemma. They had fought the same enemy as the Americans, and the men of the Wahoo were allies. One British officer said privately, "To prosecute this would fracture the unity we have." So, the case never became a trial. No one stood before a tribunal. No one faced charges. The men who fired the shells were never questioned by any court. The decision was made quietly. Acknowledge the tragedy. Do not pursue justice. Because war, in the end, must be won. And allies do not put allies in the dock. Years later, when the first historians raised the incident in books, one man defended Morton fiercely. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the U.S. Submarine Fleet in the Pacific. He wrote, "We did not fire on helpless men. We fired on enemy troops who were attempting to reach land and rejoin the fight." This was the U.S. Navy's official stance for decades. According to Lockwood, Morton believed the boat contained armed Japanese soldiers. Some survivors were seen firing back. The decision was necessary to protect the submarine. Lockwood refused to bend. In his view, Morton had simply obeyed a brutal arithmetic of war. But the survivors remember something else. One Indian POW, interviewed by historians in the 1960s, said, "We were not armed. We waved our arms for mercy. The guns did not stop. Another recalled clinging to wreckage, watching the submarine silhouette pass. The sea was red around me. Bodies floated like driftwood. Their memories were not strategic, not tactical. They were human. They remembered faces, not uniforms. Water, not policy. Screens, not orders. And whether or not some Japanese soldiers had weapons, most did not. The majority were POWs, civilians, Koreans pressed into labor, men who could not fight back. Morton never answered questions about Buyo Maru. He never stood before a board, never testified, because he never returned. In January 1944, USS Wahoo went missing. She never came back. Only decades later, in 2005, the wreck was discovered in the La Penusa Strait, resting under cold water and rusted silence. Morton went to his grave a hero, but also a mystery. For years after the war, the story of Wahoo was told in books with titles like Sink 'em All, The Fighting Submarine, Wahoo, The Patrols of America's Most Famous Submarine. In these versions, Morton was daring, ruthless, brutal, brilliant. Buyo Maru was rarely mentioned, or dismissed in a paragraph. But as decades passed, historians returned to the patrol reports and survivor accounts. The tone changed. One naval historian wrote, "Morton was both effective and controversial. His legacy is not simple." Another observed, "He likely believed he was shooting soldiers. He was not, and tragedy was the result." Morton was neither monster nor saint. He was, like in so many in war, a man making decisions based off duty. No single figure is universally accepted. Estimates range between 200 to 1,000 dead, but numbers do not tell the story. They do not tell the men who clung to driftwood for days until a fishing boat found them. They do not tell the story of soldiers who waved their arms and was shot. They do not tell of the crewmen who later said, "I have dreams of men in the water. I can still see their faces." Numbers do not speak. Only stories do.